Okay, my friends, are you ready to now implement the step 3 of this upper confidence bound implementation? We already implemented step 2, and we even got these values, for each of the ads. And now we need to use a trick to find the maximum of them. All right, so in the last tutorial, we left things at this else, else meaning if the numbers of selections of this ad number I we're dealing with right now in the second for loop is equal to 0, meaning if the ad was not selected yet. Well, in that case, what we have to do is absolutely select it, right? We must select it. If the ad has not been selected yet, we have to select it. Why is that? That's because, as we explained at the end of the previous tutorial, we need to make sure that the denominator NIN, which is the number of times the ad I was selected, is different than 0, so that we can indeed compute the average reward and then the upper confidence bound. So there is a priority now, at the beginning, in the first round, to select all the ads. And therefore, the trick that we have to use is to set the upper bound of this particular ad we're dealing with right now in the second for loop to a super high value, so that it will be indeed the maximum upper bound and therefore the one that will be selected, because at the end, we will of course select the ad with the highest upper confidence bound. So the trick right now is to take that variable again, which so far, thanks to this if condition, is equal to this value. But if we're not in this if condition and if we are in this else, well, we would like that same variable to be equal to a super high value, like, infinity. But we can't set it equal to infinity. However, we can set it equal to a super high value, like 1 times 10 at the power of 400. That's a classic trick in Python to, use the infinity. This is a super high value, which will definitely be the maximum of the upper bound, so that if that ad was not selected yet, well, we will select it because indeed it will have the maximum of the upper confidence bound. And now we need to finish with a final if condition to make sure that indeed we select the ad with the highest upper confidence bound. And the trick to do that is to play with max upper bound here, which so far is initialized to 0, before we start this second for loop, and that upper bound. And the if condition that we have to add here is to check if, well, the upper bound of the ad we're dealing with right now in the second for loop and which we've just computed either through this first if condition or in this else, we have to check if that upper bound is larger than the maximum upper bound, right? Because, okay, at the beginning, before we start this for loop, max upper bound is equal to 0. Then we will compute this for the first ad. We will get either a value if this ad had already been selected, or we will get this value. And of course, since this or this will be larger than 0, then this max upper bound will be updated, right? And this is exactly our next step here. If indeed upper bound is larger than this maximum upper bound, well, we need to update that max upper bound value, there we go, to be equal to that new upper bound just computed either through this if condition or this else, all right? So upper bound, okay? And then in the next step of this second for loop, well, we will compute a new value of the upper bound here if, the ad was already selected. And if this new value of the upper bound is larger than this new max upper bound, which was just updated to the previous upper bound of the previous ad, well, we will update it again. You see the trick? Each time, at each iteration of this second for loop, we compute a new upper bound. We compare that upper bound with the largest upper bound collected so far, with the previous ads. And if that new upper bound is larger than this maximum upper bound, well, we update the new maximum upper bound. And of course, for the ads that have not been selected yet, this upper bound will always be larger than the max upper bound, and therefore this ad will be selected. And speaking of this ad will be selected, well, that's exactly the final step we have to do here. We have to select the ad. And in order to select it, well, we need to update that variable here, ad equals 0, to, of course, I, the index I of that ad we're dealing with right now in the second for loop. And that's it, my friend. That's how you implement step 3, by making sure at the same time that you select the ad that was not selected yet. And at some point, after a couple of rounds, well, all the ads will be selected. Well, actually, after the 10th round, all the ads will automatically be selected. And then we will only be in this condition. This else condition will never happen after the 10th round. Okay? So there you go. Now, congratulations. This step 3 is implemented. We selected the I that has a maximum upper confidence bound. And now what we simply need to do is just finish this main code here, this cell, by going back to this first for loop, iterating through the rounds, through the users who connect to the website. And well, the way to do this is just to update each of these variables which we created at the beginning, before starting the for loop, to indeed get, that full list of all the ads selected over the round. Then, of course, update this variable to update the numbers of selections for each of the ads. Then, of course, update this one, which gives the accumulated rewards for each of the ads. And finally, update the total accumulated reward over the round. All right, so I will let you do this. Please try to do it yourself before the next tutorial, and we will implement the solution together in the next tutorial, which will at the same time finish and complete that cell implementing the upper confidence bound algorithm. All right, so good luck again, and I'll see you in the next tutorial for the solution. And until then, enjoy machine learning.